The Assassin's Order is real.
The whole occupying assassins throughout time all around the world in an animus machine to stop a global conspiracy, not so much.
But the Assassin's Order does, or at least did, have a basis in real history. So what is that history?
In the first Assassin's Creed, you take control of assassin Altair ibn la-Ahad in 1191. Altair is a part of the Assassin's Brotherhood, whose rivals are the Knights Templar. After a turn of events, his mentor, Al-Mualim, sends him on a number of assassinations, which sees him traveling through the Holy Land, or today's Israel, Palestine, and Syria, to take down Knights Templar marks, some of whom were based on real people.
That is a very general synopsis. So, let's break down each of these elements. We'll start with the most important aspect of the game and series, the Assassin's Brotherhood.
This is very loosely based on the real-life order of assassins.
To give you a very quick background on why this was formed,
in the Islamic faith, there are Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims. After the Prophet Muhammad died, a schism formed around who the successor should be. The Sunnis believed there was no formally declared successor to Prophet Muhammad. Meanwhile, the Shia believed that Muhammad specifically designated his cousin, Hazrat Ali, as his successor.
There was, and still are, divisions in beliefs in both of these groups, just like any long-running religious entity, really. But what we're going to focus on specifically is a subsect of the Shia.
That's because the founder of what would become known as the Assassin's Order was a part of the Islam Shia subsect, the Ismailis, and that founder was Hassan-i Sabbah. According to one source, Hassan-i Sabbah was born in Qam, Persia, circa 1050 AD. As a child, he'd eventually moved to Ray, Iran, where he'd become interested in Ismailism. This led Hassan to Cairo, Egypt, where he studied for around 3 years and became an Ismaili missionary.
After that, he traveled with the mission of spreading Ismailism, often running into trouble due to people with opposing religious views who didn't like what he was preaching.
This would all culminate in Hassani finding the castle of Alamut in 1088 AD. This castle was built in the mountains and, thanks to its natural defenses, thought to be impregnable, thus the perfect place to set up a base.
But there was a problem. Hassani had a total of 0 army. Kinda hard to take over a place with those stats.
So instead, he tried something that was, honestly, pretty brilliant. He sent other comrades and followers into the villages and valleys surrounding Alamut to convert the villagers to Ismailism. After that, they'd work up the ladder by converting more and more important people, and eventually, over the course of 2 years, they'd infiltrated the castle with his converts. And contrary to the assassin name, without dropping a single bit of blood, in 1090, Hassani was able to kick out the previous owner of the castle, and apparently even offered to pay him,
proving that the long con is always the way to go.
It's here that Hassan founded a Nizari Isma'ili order, which would become known in history as the Order of Assassins, and that is what the Assassin's Creed's Brotherhood is very loosely based on.
So, now that you know a bit about Hassani and Alamut, it's worth mentioning that
in an interview with CVG, Assassin's Creed producer Jade Raymond specifically cites the book Alamut as inspiration for the game, which is, in turn, inspired by Hassan-i Sabbah, the Order of Assassin, and Alamut Castle.
Okay, so now that we have the founding down, I'm sure you're wondering about those assassins.
Well, after taking control of the castle, Sabbah next turned to expanding his influence and, of course, the religion of Nizari Isma'ili. However, they didn't have the same military weight as their enemies, so they'd fight utilizing guerrilla warfare. What this meant was using espionage, infiltrating enemy strongholds, and, of course, assassinating high-value targets, with many of them being religious or secular leaders. While the group overall is known as the Assassins, it was really only a small handful who performed assassinations, known as the Fidai. The Fidai would typically use daggers, arrows, or poison to kill their enemies, and it's very likely that these were suicide missions. Many assassinations would take place in the open, and beyond killing the target, part of it was meant to shock witnesses. That meant the Fidai would likely be apprehended or killed afterwards.
Sadly, they didn't wear amazingly cool white hoodies, as far as we know.
These assassins were so successful in their murders that eventually, politically significant murders started to be associated with them, even if they weren't the culprits.
I mean, after all, it's not like assassination is exactly unique. I mean, I just finished a video on Mortal Kombat and the history of Shinobi, who were, assassins? There's a lot of misinformation around the Fidai and the Assassin's Order overall,
because most of the history we've learned of them comes from their rivals during the Crusades, who very likely embellished on negative aspects, or straight up made things up, which would filter to Marco Polo. For example, one famous account from Marco Polo about how the Fidai were recruited is as follows. According to him, potential Fidai were told tales of a paradise they would get to enter if they became a Fidai. And being fed these tales, they'd be drugged with opium and then placed in a secret garden filled with luxuries and women. They'd then be told that they could enter paradise once again if they were willing to die for their master. But historians believe this tale to be totally absurd and far from the truth. Another similar tale is that the word assassins derives from hashashin, which is possibly something that the Nizari Isma'ili rivals would call them as a derogatory term, and not what they were actually called. Hashashin deriving from hashish, essentially meaning someone who uses drugs. The Order of Assassins continued to operate from 1090 to 1275 AD, where they'd finally be stopped by the Mongols.
When you think about the Crusades, what image comes to mind?
If your answer was a knight decked out in white with a giant red cross, then you'd be thinking of the Knights Templar. These were warrior monks who would protect Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem during the Crusades and who would fight in battles. Given the assassins were Muslims, that naturally gave way to tensions as the two factions were religiously opposed.
That said, they didn't really clash that much.
The assassins did kill a Christian in 1152, Raymond II, Count of Tripoli.
Remember, the assassins were established in 1090, and their first Christian victim wasn't until 1152.
It's not exactly clear why now, and of all people, Raymond II was targeted. However, it's speculated that it was because Raymond established an order of Templars at the recently captured Tartosa, and they weren't happy with that. During the Third Crusade, in 1192, Conrad of Montferrat was to be made king of Jerusalem, but before being crowned, he was stabbed to death by two assassins who disguised themselves as Christian monks. This was potentially ordered by Rashid ad-Din Sinan, better known as the Old Man of the Mountain.
Or in the case of Assassin's Creed, Al-Mualim.
That said, what purportedly proves it was Sinan behind the murder is an open letter Sinan wrote to Leopold V, Duke of Austria, taking credit for the assassination, a letter that modern historians believe was likely a forgery and written after Sinan died.
In other words, while it was believed the assassins were behind this major death, it's still a mystery who did it.
Either way, outside of these notable events, over the Assassins' 200-year history, the Assassins were more focused on rival religious Muslim ideologies as opposed to Christians, meaning the Knights Templar and Assassins didn't really directly clash all that much.
As far as some of the Knights Templar targets in the game, they're pretty embellished from their real-life counterparts.
There's Garnier de Nobles, who is a Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller, but definitely didn't conduct mind-altering experiments like in the game. Then there's William V, Marquis of Montferrat, who reigned from 1135 to 1191, while he's shown as middle-aged in the game, being born in 1115. At this point, he would have been 76. Master Sibrand, who founded a hospital in Akan, which eventually became a base for the Teutonic Knights. While he was given the title of First Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights, which is the title he holds in Assassin's Creed, really that was a retroactive title given to him.
And probably not a secret member of the Knights Templar. In Assassin's Creed, Al-Mualim is the Assassin's leader who turns out to be the big bad, betraying both the Templars and Assassins to get the Apple of Eden. However, in real life, most of that, not the case. As I mentioned earlier, Al-Mualim is based on the real-life Rashid ad-Din Sinan, who was nicknamed the Old Man of the Mountain.
He became a chief da'i of the Assassins, who was the leader of a Syrian branch from 1162 until 1193. One, again, potentially true or potentially false story about Sinan involves his rival, the Sultan Saladin, who ruled Egypt and Syria. In the story, one night, while laying siege against the Nizari stronghold of Masuyaf, he awoke to find a strange figure leaving his tent. Next to him, a poisoned dagger with a note threatening to kill him if he didn't stop his siege. And thus, he did.
I mean, according to this legend.
Notably, there's nothing of Sinan ever betraying the Assassins or seeking an all-powerful Apple of Eden. He was just a famous member of the Order.
So that is the real history behind Assassin's Creed. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Real History Of. If you did, it's actually the 4th episode in a series, so please consider checking out the rest.